He built a visor to help a blind alien girl, but the military wanted him silenced. The mechanic and the silent visitor, the workshop smelled of ozone and burnt metal. A combination had grown to love over his 5 years on Kepler 442b. The frontier colony sat at the edge of explored space, where 7 different alien species mingled with the handful of humans brave enough to call this place home. Marcus had found his niche here, far from Earth's crowded cities and endless regulations. His hands, scarred from years of work, moved with practiced precision as he dissected a Yorvan atmospheric processor that most human engineers wouldn't dare touch. The colony's main strip buzzed with activity outside his open workshop doors. Merchants hawked their wares in a dozen languages, while hover transports hummed past carrying ore from the nearby mines. Marcus preferred the chaos to the sterile quiet of Earth's automated factories. Here, his skills meant something. Here, he was needed. He sensed her presence before he saw her, a slight shift in the air currents, a barely perceptible sound of breathing that didn't match his own rhythm. Marcus glanced up from his work to find a small figure standing in his doorway. The child couldn't have been more than 7 standard years old, with the distinctive blue-gray skin of the Zalari people. Her silver hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the workshop's skylights, creating an almost ethereal glow around her delicate features. The Zalari were known for their grace and beauty, but also for their fierce pride and complex social hierarchies. This child wore simple clothes, nothing like the elaborate robes he'd seen on other Zalari in the marketplace. She stood perfectly still, her large eyes fixed on his workbench with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. Marcus cleared his throat and offered what he hoped was a friendly smile. The child didn't respond, didn't even blink. She simply continued to watch as he returned to his work, her presence both curious and strangely calming. After an hour, she disappeared as quietly as she had arrived, leaving Marcus to wonder if he'd imagined the whole encounter. She returned the next day and the day after that, always silent, always watching. Marcus found himself explaining his work out loud, partly to fill the silence and partly because she seemed genuinely interested. He showed her how Yorvan technology relied on crystalline matrices that human circuits couldn't interface with directly. He demonstrated the way Kelvin power cells needed precise pressure adjustments that most species' fingers were too large to manage. On the 7th day of her visits, Marcus finally asked her name. The child tilted her head slightly but remained silent. He tried different languages, even the few phrases of Zalari he'd picked up, but she never responded. It wasn't until he accidentally knocked over a container of small components that he realized something was wrong. The parts scattered across the floor with a metallic clatter that made Marcus wince. He bent to collect them, but the child moved, first her hands sweeping across the ground in careful, methodical patterns. She wasn't looking at the parts. Her eyes stared straight ahead, unfocused, while her fingers searched. The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. She was blind. The realization changed everything. Her intense staring hadn't been watching at all, but rather pointing her ears toward the sounds of his work. The way she never quite met his eyes. The careful way she moved through his workshop, always touching the same reference points. How had he missed it? Marcus gently took her searching hands and placed a few components in her palm. She smiled then, the first expression he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face entirely. Without thinking, he began describing each part in detail, its texture, its purpose, its weight. She listened with her whole body, leaning forward as if she could absorb the information through proximity alone. That evening, after she left, Marcus made inquiries. The local information broker, a reptilian skarn named Vertex, provided answers for a modest fee. The child's name was Kira, and her story was tragic even by frontier colony standards. 3 months ago, she'd been exposed to an experimental terraforming device that had malfunctioned. The radiation had destroyed her optical nerves completely. Zalari medicine, for all its advancement, couldn't regenerate the damage. For a species that communicated as much through visual cues and color changes in their skin as through speech, blindness was particularly cruel. Kira belonged to a minor branch of House Valen, one of the 5 great Zalari clans. Her parents had brought her to Kepler 442b, hoping the colony's diverse population might offer solutions their own people couldn't provide. But hope had faded as specialist after specialist declared her condition irreversible. The family had grown increasingly isolated, and Kira had taken to wandering the colony's commercial district while her parents worked. Marcus spent that night staring at his workshop's ceiling, his mind racing through possibilities. Zalari optical nerves were different from human ones, more complex in some ways, simpler in others. Their brains processed visual information through quantum entanglement at the cellular level, something human science barely understood. But what if he didn't need to fix her eyes? What if he could bypass them entirely? The next morning, he was already working when Kira arrived. She took her usual position, but Marcus called her over to his workbench. He'd spent the dawn hours modifying a human neural interface headset, stripping it down to its basic components. If he could map other sensory inputs to the visual processing centers of her brain, perhaps he could give her a different kind of sight. The work consumed him for days. Kira continued her silent visits, sometimes helping by holding components, or fetching tools he described. Marcus found himself talking more than he had in years, explaining concepts that no child should understand, but that she absorbed with remarkable focus. He learned that she wasn't mute by choice, but by trauma. The accident had shocked her system so badly that she'd stopped speaking entirely. The breakthrough came when Marcus realized he'd been thinking like a human. Zalari brains didn't just process visual information, they processed energy fields, electromagnetic radiation, even quantum fluctuations that humans couldn't perceive. Instead of trying to restore normal vision, he could amplify these other senses and route them through her damaged optical system's neural pathways. He salvaged components from a dozen different technologies: a Yorvan quantum scanner, a Kelvan thermal imager, a human electromagnetic field detector, and even some Zalari bioneural processors from a discarded medical unit. The resulting device looked like an elegant visor, thin enough not to be cumbersome but complex enough to process multiple input streams simultaneously. When Marcus placed the visor on Kira's head for the first time, he held his breath. The device hummed to life, its surface rippling with subtle patterns of light that she couldn't see but others would find beautiful. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Kira gasped, her hands flying to the visor as her mouth opened in a perfect circle of surprise. She turned her head slowly, and Marcus knew she was seeing something. Not the workshop as he saw it, but heat patterns, energy fields, the electromagnetic signatures of every device around them. Her hands reached out, no longer searching but confident, finding his face with startling accuracy. When she smiled this time, tears streamed down her cheeks, and she spoke her first word in 3 months, a whispered, beautiful, in accented human, standard that made Marcus's own eyes water. The visor would need adjustments, calibrations, improvements. But it worked. Kira could navigate the world again, could interact with her environment in ways that even sighted Zalari couldn't. She spent the rest of that day exploring the workshop with renewed wonder, seeing the familiar space through completely new senses. As the sun set over Kepler 442b, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold that Kira experienced as cascading waves of thermal radiation, Marcus felt a satisfaction deeper than any repair job had ever given him. He'd done more than fix a broken machine. He'd given a child her world back, transformed in ways that no one could have imagined. The debt of honor. 3 days after the visor's first successful test, Marcus's workshop received visitors that shattered its usual morning calm. 4 Zalari, guards in ceremonial armor, stood at his entrance, their energy weapons politely but firmly at ready position. Behind them, a figure emerged from an official transport that Marcus recognized as House Valen's colors, deep purple with silver trim that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Commander Thera Valen stood 6 feet tall, her bearing military, straight despite the flowing robes of Zalari nobility. Her skin held the same blue-gray tone as Kira's, but with an underlying shimmer that spoke of pure bloodlines going back generations. When her gaze fixed on Marcus, He felt the weight of centuries, of tradition and authority pressing down on him. This was Kira's mother, and she did not look pleased. Marcus set down his tools slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. Kira sat on her usual stool, the visor active as she sorted components by their electromagnetic signatures, a game they'd developed to help her practice. She hadn't noticed the arrivals yet, too focused on her task. Commander Thara's expression shifted when she saw her daughter. The stern mask cracked, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. She took a step forward, then stopped, as if afraid to disturb the scene. When she spoke, her voice carried the melodic tones of High Zalari, translated through the universal communicator at her throat. The human mechanic Marcus Chen was stated more than asked. "You created the device my daughter wears." The anger Marcus had expected wasn't there. Instead, he heard confusion, hope, and something else he couldn't quite identify. He nodded, straightening his shoulders despite the intimidating presence of the guards. Kira's head snapped up at her mother's voice. Through the visor, she would see her mother as a brilliant constellation of biological energy, more complex and beautiful than any machine. The child slipped from her stool and ran to Thara, who caught her with a grace that spoke of combat training despite her noble status. The embrace lasted long enough for Marcus to feel like an intruder in his own workshop. When Thara finally looked up, her eyes glistened with moisture that Zalari rarely showed in public. She set Kira down gently, but kept one hand on her daughter's shoulder, as if afraid she might disappear. "The physicians of 5 worlds told me nothing could be done," Thara said, her voice steadier now. "The greatest minds of the Zalari collective declared her condition permanent. Yet a human mechanic with no medical training accomplishes the impossible. How?" Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "Different perspective, different approach. I didn't try to fix what was broken. I just found a way around it. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most obvious one." One of the guards stepped forward, whispering urgently in Thara's ear. Her expression darkened and she nodded before addressing Marcus again. "Your achievement has not gone unnoticed. House Valen owes you a debt that cannot be easily repaid, but your action has also created complications you don't understand." Marcus felt the temperature in the room shift, though his instruments detected no actual change. Political complications, he guessed. The Zalari were notorious for their complex web of alliances and rivalries. Helping Kira had inadvertently placed him in the middle of something larger. Thara confirmed his suspicions. House Korvax has already sent inquiries about the technology. They claim that since the accident occurred in a jointly administered district, they have equal rights to any medical innovations that result from it. It's absurd, but they have supporters in the Colonial Council. The name Korvax sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He'd repaired equipment for them before, always through intermediaries, always with an underlying threat that failure would have consequences. They were known for aggressive expansion and a willingness to bend rules that other houses wouldn't dare touch. "With your permission," Marcus said carefully, "I'd like to make something clear. The visor is specifically calibrated to Kira's neural patterns. It won't work for anyone else without extensive modification. I built it for her, not as a prototype for mass production." Thara studied him for a long moment. "You would refuse profit from your invention?" "Most humans I've encountered are driven by commercial interests. Most humans haven't spent 2 weeks watching a brave little girl refuse to give up, despite losing one of her most important senses," Marcus replied. "Some things aren't for sale." The commander's expression softened further. She spoke rapidly in Zalari to her guards, who immediately relaxed their stances. When she turned back to Marcus, her entire demeanor had changed. "House Valen formally recognizes its debt to you, Marcus Chen. You will be under our protection and considered an honorary member of our household. This is not a small thing." Marcus started to protest, but Thara raised a hand. "Tonight there will be a celebration in your honor. It is tradition, and refusing would insult not just House Valen, but the 5 allied houses that support us. You will attend, you will be recognized, and you will accept our gratitude with grace." The way she said it made it clear this wasn't a request. Marcus glanced at Kira, who was practically vibrating with excitement. The visor translated her emotional state into subtle color shifts that only she could see, but her joy was obvious even without the device. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Zalari servants arrived to take measurements for formal attire. Others brought gifts that Marcus tried to refuse but couldn't without causing offense. His small workshop was transformed into something resembling a shrine to human ingenuity, with banners displaying both Earth's symbol and House Valen's crest. As the colony's sun began its descent, Marcus found himself standing in clothes that cost more than 6 months of his usual income. The fabric responded to his body temperature and movement, adjusting for perfect comfort while maintaining an appearance of liquid starlight. He felt ridiculous until he saw Kira in her own formal wear, the visor now decorated with precious metals that somehow enhanced, rather than obscured, its function. The celebration venue was a crystalline dome at the heart of the Zalari district, a structure that seemed to defy physics with its impossible curves and floating platforms. Hundreds of guests from multiple species had gathered, though the Zalari predominated. Marcus noticed representatives from at least 3 of the great houses, their distinctive colors creating a rainbow of political allegiances. Lord Korvax himself stood near the central platform, his dark purple skin almost black in the ambient lighting. His eyes tracked Marcus's movement with predatory interest. The rival house leader was younger than Marcus had expected, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never having faced real defeat. Thera guided Marcus through the intricate social dance of introductions and acknowledgments. Each conversation carried layers of meaning he could barely grasp. A comment about the weather might be a threat or an alliance offer depending on the speaker's tone and hand position. Marcus felt like he was navigating a minefield blindfolded. The formal presentation came at the evening's peak. Thara stood before the assembled crowd, her voice carrying clearly through the dome's perfect acoustics. She spoke of innovation, of the barriers between species that could be broken through understanding and cooperation. She told Kira's story without melodrama, letting the facts speak for themselves. When she called Marcus forward, he felt every eye in the room focus on him. The weight of their attention was almost physical. Thara placed a crystal pendant around his neck, its surface swirling with captured light that seemed alive, the badge of House Valen, marking him as family in all but blood. Lord Korvax chose that moment to speak. An impressive achievement for a human, he said, his voice cutting through the applause. One wonders what other applications such technology might have. Surely House Valen wouldn't monopolize an innovation that could benefit all Zalari. The room went silent. The challenge was subtle but unmistakable. Thara's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Kira stepped forward. The child's voice was small but clear, speaking for the first time in public since her accident. Marcus gave me sight when everyone else gave up. He asked for nothing in return. That's what makes humans special. They see possibilities where others see only endings. The simple honesty of her words cut through the political tension like a blade. Even Korvax seemed momentarily taken aback. The celebration resumed, but Marcus noticed the calculating look in the rival lord's eyes. This wasn't over. As the evening wound down, Marcus found himself on a balcony overlooking the colony's lights. Thara joined him, her formal mask finally dropping to reveal exhaustion underneath. "You've made an enemy tonight," she said quietly. "Korvax doesn't forgive those who deny him what he wants." "Then it's a good thing I have powerful friends," Marcus replied, touching the crystal pendant. Thara smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her features. He'd given her daughter back something precious. Whatever came next, that truth would stand between them like a shield. Human ingenuity versus alien politics. The attack came 3 nights later, though calling it an attack was perhaps too simple for the elaborate deception that unfolded. Marcus woke to find his workshop's security system disabled and Kira's emergency beacon activating from somewhere beyond the colony's borders. The message was clear. Come alone. Bring the visor schematics, or lose the child forever. Marcus had expected something like this, though not so soon. He'd spent the intervening days not just refining the visor but preparing for the inevitable moment when someone would try to take it by force. Human paranoia, his alien friends called it. Marcus preferred to think of it as healthy caution, born from humanity's violent history. The beacon led him to an abandoned mining facility 20 kilometers from the colony proper. The structure jutted from the landscape like broken teeth, its corridors dark except for emergency lighting that cast everything in hellish red. Marcus approached on foot, having left his vehicle a kilometer away. In his pack, he carried 3 devices that looked innocuous but represented everything he'd learned about alien technology's vulnerabilities. Lord Korvax waited in the facility's main processing chamber, surrounded by 6 guards and enough firepower to level a city block. Kira stood beside him, her visor missing, her small hands bound with energy restraints that would deliver a shock if she moved too suddenly. The sight of her fear made something cold and dangerous wake up in Marcus's chest. "The human arrives," Korvax announced, his tone suggesting this was all a great game. "I trust you brought what I requested. My technical staff is quite eager to examine your innovation. Imagine thousands of Zalari children suffering from sensory impairments, all of whom could benefit from your technology. Surely you wouldn't deny them hope for the sake of one house's pride." Marcus set down his pack slowly, keeping his hands visible. He'd dealt with bullies before, human and alien alike. They all shared the same weakness. They assumed their power, made them invincible. It was a very non-human way of thinking. Humans had learned long ago that the mighty could fall to the clever. "The schematics are encrypted in a quantum storage device," Marcus said, pulling out what looked like a standard data crystal. "But there's something you should know about human technology, Lord Korvax. We build in safeguards." Korvax gestured impatiently. "Spare me your threats. My technical team can break any encryption given time. Hand over the device and I might even allow you to continue your work. Under House Korvax's supervision, of course." Marcus smiled, the expression sharp enough to make several guards shift nervously. "See? That's where you made your first mistake. You assumed I'd react like a Zalari bound by honor and tradition, but humans, we survived our homeworld by being unpredictable." He pressed a hidden switch on his belt. Every piece of Zalari technology in the room, from the guards' weapons to the lighting systems, flickered and died. The electromagnetic pulse was specifically tuned to Zalari frequencies, leaving Marcus's human hybrid equipment untouched. In the sudden darkness, his modified thermal goggles gave him perfect vision, while everyone else was blind. Marcus moved like water through chaos. The guards, trained for energy weapon combat and shield tactics, were unprepared for the simple brutality of human close-quarters fighting. He disabled them with strikes to nerve clusters he'd mapped during his years of repairing Zalari technology. Understanding how something worked meant understanding how to break it. Korvax himself tried to run, but Marcus had anticipated that. A small device he'd planted during his approach activated, sealing the exits with an energy field that would take hours to breach. The trap that was meant for Marcus had become a cage for his enemies. In 90 seconds, it was over. 6 guards lay unconscious, and Korvax found himself pressed against a wall with Marcus's arm across his throat. The human strength, evolved from a higher gravity world, was impossible for the pampered noble to resist. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. "You're going to release Kira. You're going to publicly acknowledge that. The Visor technology belongs to her and her alone, and you're going to forget this ever happened. Because if you don't, I'll release everything." Korvax's eyes widened. Marcus pulled out a second device, this one definitely human in origin. "Every questionable deal, every bribe, every dead colonist that House Korvax is responsible for. Did you really think I'd come here without insurance? Humans document everything, Lord Korvax. It's what we do." The evidence had taken Marcus 2 days to compile, using his network of contacts across the colony. Humans might be newcomers to the galactic stage, but they understood leverage in ways that older species had forgotten. Information was the ultimate weapon. "You wouldn't dare," Korvax sputtered. "The political ramifications would affect the entire colony. Trade agreements would collapse." "Not my problem," Marcus replied. "I'm just a mechanic who wants to fix things in peace, but hurt that little girl, and I'll burn your entire house to the ground. Metaphorically speaking, of course." The sound of approaching vehicles broke the standoff. Thara's forces had arrived. Alerted by a beacon Marcus had activated the moment he'd entered the facility. But they held back, letting him handle the situation. They understood that this was a human solution to a Zalari problem. Marcus released Korvax and walked over to Kira, gently removing her restraints. She immediately wrapped her arms around his neck, her small body shaking with relief. He pulled her spare visor from his pack, the one he'd been secretly working on, and placed it on her head. Her sob of relief as her enhanced senses returned nearly broke his composure. "Choose," Marcus told Korvax. "Mutual destruction or mutual silence. Your house's reputation for a child's freedom. Seems like an easy choice to me." Korvax's face cycled through several colors, each representing a different emotion in Zalari physiology. Finally, he settled on a deep blue of resignation. House Korvax withdraws all claims to the visual assistance technology. The child's unfortunate absence was merely a misunderstanding that has now been resolved. The political doublespeak made Marcus want to laugh, but he kept his expression neutral. He'd won, but rubbing it in would only create future problems. Humans had learned that lesson through centuries of warfare. Sometimes, leaving your enemy an honorable retreat was the best victory. As they left the facility, Thara's forces creating a protective corridor, she leaned close to Marcus. "That was exceptionally dangerous and politically brilliant. You've been studying our culture?" Marcus shrugged, Kira still clinging to his neck. "Just applying human solutions to alien problems. We're good at improvising." The aftermath was surprisingly quiet. Korvax kept his word, possibly because the alternative was too devastating to contemplate. The Visor technology remained exclusively Kira's, though Marcus quietly began working on variations for other species' sensory impairments. Each one was custom-built, impossible to mass-produce, ensuring that no one could weaponize his work. House Valan's protection became more than ceremonial. Marcus found his workshop expanded, his supply chains guaranteed and his safety assured by guards who'd learned to appreciate human unconventional thinking. He became a bridge between communities, the human who thought like an alien and the alien friend who fought like a human. Kira returned to his workshop daily, no longer silent but full of questions and observations. The Visor had evolved with her, becoming more sophisticated as she learned to interpret its inputs. She could see things that no one else could, patterns in energy fields that revealed hidden truths about the world around her. Months later, when a delegation from Earth arrived to study the colony's unusual harmony between species, they found Marcus in his workshop, surrounded by technology from 7 different worlds. Kira sat on her stool, using her visor to help diagnose a problem in a Yorvan computer core that had stumped even its creators. The delegation leader, a stern woman with military bearing, watched them work in silence before speaking. "You've created something unprecedented here, Mr. Chen. A human fully integrated into alien society while maintaining his humanity." "How?" Marcus looked up from his work, considering the question. "Same way humans always have," he said finally. "We adapt, we learn, and we protect what matters. Out here, that little girl matters. The rest is just politics and technology." The woman nodded slowly, understanding more than his words conveyed. Earth's reports would speak of technological innovation and diplomatic success. But those who visited Marcus's workshop would remember something simpler and more profound. A human mechanic who'd given a blind alien child new eyes, and in doing so, had shown 2 species a new way to see each other. As the colony's sun set, painting the sky in colors that Kira experienced as a symphony of thermal radiation, Marcus continued his work. His hands, scarred but steady, built bridges between worlds one repair at a time. It wasn't the life he'd planned when he'd left Earth 5 years ago, but it was the life that mattered. The Visor technology never spread beyond those who truly needed it, each piece a custom work of art that couldn't be replicated or weaponized. Marcus had won not through strength or politics, but through the most human trait of all, the stubborn refusal to accept that something couldn't be fixed. In his workshop, surrounded by alien technology and protected by alien friends, Marcus Chen had found his purpose. not as a conqueror or diplomat, but as a mechanic who fixed broken things, whether they were machines or the barriers between species. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough to change the world.